Hello and welcome to Challenge 1 of the Python Basics course. First of all, I want to say congrats for coming this far and finishing the basics of Python. Now at the end, I've prepared a couple of challenges for you to be able to assess how good you got in Python. The difficulty of the first challenge is easy to intermediate, and the challenge is to encode Morse code. So your input will be some string, as an example, help me, and your output will be exactly that in Morse code. So character for character as Morse code. Now don't worry, I don't expect you to know Morse code. That's why I've prepared a dictionary for you of the characters that you will need, and you'll be able to use that. Just copy that in the description box down below. So that was the easy part. Now the intermediate part of it is to do the decode of that. So just the other way around. Your input will be the Morse code and your output should be whatever that Morse code says. Okay, so just two functions, one to encode and one to decode. I expect all of you to be able to create the encoder, but the decoder is a little bit more challenging and needs a couple of steps more. It's not that hard, but don't get frustrated if you don't get that. So pause the video here and go do the challenge. Now I'm gonna head over to PyCharm and do the solve. Alright, so I'm in PyCharm and I've copied this dictionary over to work with it. And the first thing that I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna create the encryption method or the encoder method. I'm gonna call it define encrypt, and as an input I'm gonna get chars. I'm gonna call that chars. I'm gonna call that variable chars, and it's gonna be a string. Okay, I'm gonna specify the type of it as well because I just like it that way. And in that I'm gonna say let's create an empty string for the output, and then I'm gonna create that empty string. I'm gonna fill it up, right? So I'm gonna say for I in chars. Right? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and say out plus equal charToDots, that's my dictionary, right? charToDots dot get I, right? So let's translate that using that dictionary. And after each character, add an empty space just to be able to tell those characters apart. Okay? Just add an empty space and then return the output. Okay? Now, if you look at this, our output is going to have an extra empty space, and I want to get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say just output from index 0, oh, not 120, 0 to the length of output. Okay, -1. And remember, that is going to be exclusive, so the last digit or the last index won't be included in that. Okay, so let's check it out. I'm gonna say print encrypt of help me in all caps because my dictionary has only capitalized characters in it, and there you go, it has encrypted it and it's pretty fast. And that was the easy part. If you've come this far, that's pretty good already. But now I'm going to go ahead and get to the more challenging part of it. Okay, so let's define a new function, call it decrypt. And I'm going to call the argument of it Morse for Morse code because the input is going to be a Morse code. And that is also going to be in string. Okay, now the first thing that I'm thinking of is that I can't use this dictionary for the same purpose here. Why? Because here my values, okay, the stuff that I want translated into the other are the values here. So I need a new dictionary with all of these information the other way around. So values as keys and keys as values. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that right next to this one. And I'm gonna call that one dots to char. And I'm gonna let that be equal to an empty dictionary. And then I'm going to fill it up. Okay, I'm going to say for tuples of key and value in charToDots dot items. Okay, so I'm going to get all the tuples or all the items in charToDots. And what I'm going to do with them is that I'm going to turn it around and put it in dots to char, right? So I'm going to say dots to char of that value is going to be equal to key. Right? And I have my new dictionary right here. So the next thing that I'm thinking of is that I need to parse all of my Morse code. Why? Because all of that information is in one string and you can see one character becomes more than one character, or I don't know how many characters. Okay, so I'm gonna have to parse that using the space. Okay, and the way that I'm gonna do that is that I'm gonna do it manually, and that's a good exercise too. So let's go ahead and do it. I'm gonna put my characters into a list. Let's call it chars. Okay, and let that be equal to an empty list. Okay, and now I'm gonna fill that list up. Okay, so I'm gonna say for I in range of 0 to the length of Morse. And why do I use it range based, or actually index based? You'll see in a minute. I want to check to see if Morse at position I, okay, so if Morse at position I was equal to an empty space, then I'm gonna do the separation, okay, from the last empty space to this new empty space. That's one character, okay? So I'll need to also store the index of the last space as well, okay? So I'm gonna call it last empty index, okay? Let that be equal to 0 initially, and then we're gonna update it throughout our iterations, okay? If that was the case, I'm gonna say chars dot append Morse from the index last empty index, okay, to I, and then I'm gonna update my last empty index. Okay, so last empty index equal to I plus 1. So actually this last empty index is the first index that has not been stored into the characters yet. You get what I'm saying? All right, and that should be it. But you know, when you say I, or you know, that character should be equal to the empty space, and we've used the empty space to do the separation of the characters, it can get mixed up with the normal empty space. All right, so the empty space in a sentence, for example, between the words, and we don't want that, and we're gonna add more conditions so that doesn't happen. Okay, so I'm gonna say and the last character before that empty space must not be empty, or the character after that must not be empty. Okay, so it shouldn't be an empty space between two empty spaces, so to speak. So I'm gonna say Morse at I minus 1 must not be equal to an empty space, or Morse at I plus 1 must not be equal to an empty space. Okay, and that should do the trick. So after this process, we have our words or our characters separated in this list called chars or characters, and now we're going to use this newly created dictionary to translate them into normal characters. So I'm going to go ahead and say for I in chars. Go ahead. Oh, actually, I'm going to first up create the output, right? Create the output. Let it be equal to an empty string, just like in the encryption. Okay, and for I in chars, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna go ahead and say out plus equal dots to char dot get I, and that should do the trick already. Okay, and let's afterwards return our output. Okay, so let's go ahead and check it out. To be able to check it out, I'm gonna first encrypt something. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and say print decrypt of encrypt. Alright, so first encrypt it and then decrypt it, see what it comes out. Okay, help me. Right? So let's go ahead and try that, see how it works. You can see the last character is not included, and that's what I was expecting. The reason for that is that in this algorithm that I've created right here, the last space, so you see this process happens when it encounters an empty space. Okay, at the end of the string there is no empty space, so the last chunk of it, so to speak, won't be added to the chars. Okay, to be able to add that too, I can either add it manually. Okay, so just keep that last empty index and do the rest of it as well, or I can just add an empty space to the end of my Morse code. Okay, so I'm gonna say Morse plus equal an empty space, and that's easier, so I'm gonna just leave it like that. Okay, and then now if I run it, you can see it's encrypted correctly and successfully, and you know, that works, and that's it. So let's now create an interface for it, a user interface for it, not graphical, but user interface. So let's get the input and then encrypt it and decrypt it. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and say message equals to the input from user, and the prompt is gonna be enter your message, and we are then going to encrypt that message. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and say message equals encrypt message, right? Just encrypt it and then print it. Okay, print the message and then decrypt it and print it again. Okay, so let's just print the decrypt of message as well. Okay, so we kind of demonstrate how our encryption and decryption work perfectly. Okay, it says to tell your message. I'm gonna say help me, and I'm gonna hit enter, and you can see it has encrypted it, and it has then decrypted it, and it works successfully, and that's done. Okay, but now check it out. If I say help me not capitalized, let's see what happens. You can see it can't find it because this dictionary that I had initially doesn't have the small characters. Okay, and in Morse code there is no difference between small or capitalized characters. So let's go ahead and just convert everything to the uppercase, right? Upper. Okay, there we go. So now if I say help me, there you go. Encryption, decryption, successful, and we're done. And that was it for challenge 1, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, share it with your friends and like the video and subscribe to the channel for the next challenges and for more videos. I'll see you next time.